the other day, so it's just like, it's not great. So easy.
All right. You're welcome to come and sit closer if you'd like to. I know it's more comfortable at the back, but you're welcome to sit up. Microphone? No microphone? Microphone. Microphone. Okay, I'll keep it up. Welcome everyone to our end of Darwin Day, and I'm Heath Ogden. I'm going to give the talk. I do this talk every semester. We always link it to Darwin Day in the spring semester, and then in the fall I just do it on some random day that we choose. So welcome. It is being YouTube live streamed as well, and then will be recorded. So if any of you want to find that after the fact, you can either shoot me an email or just look for Heath Ogden Darwin Day, and you'll probably find it somewhere there. But so the way I want to do this is, hopefully some more people show up too. What we'll do is we'll just I start with kind of an introduction, like maybe 20 or so minutes of kind of some introduction comments. And then what I like to do is then just open it up to question and answer. So start thinking about any questions that you want. And it's not just me providing the answers. I want it to be kind of a cross room, almost like we're all on the panel together, okay? Anyone can answer a question or ask a question. And it's okay if sometimes the answer is, I don't know. That's sometimes a good answer. So that's what I want to do. Does that sound good? Everyone okay? Okay, thanks for coming. So I got to start with my story. I was born and raised LDS. My dad was a business major at BYU, and my mom, whoops, that picture came up a little early there, but my mom was a stay-at-home mom until she went back to the university at age 68 and graduated with her bachelor's degree. And I grew up basically with the worldview that God is the creator. And so I grew up essentially a creationist, okay, thinking that God created everything. I served an LDS mission in Chile, which is where I met my wife. When I came back from the mission, I finished a BS in zoology at BYU, and then I went down to Chile, married my wife, went down to Chile, and got a master's degree in zoology. And that's kind of where I started my academic pedigree, and then I came back to BYU for a PhD in biology with an emphasis in evolution. So I'm married, have one wife, you have to say that sometimes, 4 kids. One's a BYU student. Oh, this needs to be updated. Actually, I have 2 BYU students now. The one that was on the mission just got home, and then a high school and a middle school student. You know, I believe in God, and I'm an active LDS member. And there's a picture of my family. So not the most updated. It's like a few years old, but anyway, there's my family. So people always ask me, well, how do you do this? How do you reconcile? And so for me, what I had to do is kind of think about, what are my core principles? Like, what can I always go back to help figure out, how do I know when something's true or we think it might be true? So for me, principle number 1 is simply this. I'm going to accept truth, or if you want to replace truth, you can replace that with the objective best answer, okay, to something. I'm going to accept that no matter where it comes from, no matter the source. I don't care, okay? So if the objective best answer comes from a poem, great. If it comes from science and a DNA molecule, great. If the best answer comes from some other source, great. I don't care. In my mind, I'm just looking out for the best answers. I'm looking out for the best truths. And I know that in a philosophical world that sometimes gets hard. Well, how do you know exactly what's true? And that's tough, and we're going to talk about those issues, okay? But my starting point is I don't care where good knowledge comes from. I'm just going to accept good knowledge. Okay, does that matter? Does that sit well with everyone? Okay. So here's a couple quotes. Thomas Aquinas, faith accepts divine truth as it is, whatever the source. President Russell Nelson from the LDS Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, embraces all truth that God conveys to his children, whether learned in a scientific laboratory or received by direct revelation. So again, just some quotes from people who kind of have the same idea. So whenever we have conflict, in my mind, that's conflict because you've got accurate religion and inaccurate science, inaccurate religion and accurate science, or inaccurate religion and inaccurate science. In my worldview, whenever you have accurate religion and accurate science, they should converge on the same principle, the same truth. Okay? There may be cases where maybe that doesn't quite happen, but I think for the most part it does. So once again, Russell Nelson said, there is no conflict between science and religion. Conflict only arises from an incomplete knowledge of either science or religion, or both. Whether truth comes from a scientific laboratory or by revelation, it's compatible. By the way, I made my slide way before he made that quote, so I'm not pillaging on his idea. He stole my idea. And then I think it's really good to recognize this, and most religions, I think, do recognize this, but I like that President Uchtdorf specifically said this. He said, to be perfectly frank, there have been times when members of or leaders of the church have simply made mistakes. I think this is important, that we understand that any religion, any faith, any worldview is a product of men and women who are not perfect and who make mistakes. And so there's always going to be mistakes embedded within these things. Okay, so we need to recognize that. Okay, so just as an aside, one knowledge claim that someone once said was the earth is flat. You guys ever heard this? You guys know that there are people who think that the earth is flat? Do you think there are people on this campus who think this? Yes, I have data to demonstrate this. We've been asking this question of students for a few semesters now, and a little over 1% of the respondents are saying the earth is flat. Now, I hope they're saying that out of jest or out of a joke, but nonetheless, that's the data. But we do know that there are the Flat Earth Society is fine, is ongoing, and you can just go down any internet wormhole. If you start, is flat Earth real? If you do that, I promise you, you will find plenty of content that for some people is quite convincing that the earth is flat. So that's a knowledge claim, right? And they may even show a picture, or they may show some experiment that's been done that demonstrates the earth is flat or whatever. But we know that's all bogus, right? We know that the earth is a sphere, and you just have to have a better vision, a better way of looking at that problem than simply saying the earth is flat. And there's all these different ways you can demonstrate that the earth is a sphere. You can look at seasons. You can look at shadow lengths of people standing in different areas. You can look at horizon lines where ships sink as they go over the horizon line, right? You can look at the moon and watch how when it goes through an eclipse, it's a rounded eclipse, and it doesn't matter where you watch that eclipse on any point of the earth, when it happens, whenever, it's always giving that kind of a shape. So there's lots of things. The constellations in the northern hemisphere are different from constellations in the southern hemisphere, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's tons, okay? And so, of course, that's a better worldview. So, coming back to my principle, if I accept truth, no matter where it comes from, then I have to accept the idea of a spherical earth, because all of the evidence in its totality converges on a round earth, a spherical earth, not a flat earth, right? Does that make sense? So, choosing only some evidence, okay, if I only use one or two pieces of experiments that have been done by flat earthers, and I use that to make my conclusion about the shape of the earth, I don't think that's a very good way to proceed. Choosing only some evidence as acceptable information because it happens to align with my preconceived notion, I don't think that's a good way to function. And this sometimes hurts because all of us come from a worldview or from a religious tradition sometimes. And sometimes that religious tradition seems to be in conflict with new scientific knowledge or existing scientific knowledge. And that is uncomfortable. I know that for a fact because remember, I grew up a creationist. And so I had to deal with the fact that this earth is older than 6,000 years old. And I had to deal with the fact that organisms share common ancestry, right? And that was an uncomfortable moment in my life. Not even a moment, it was an uncomfortable span of years in my life. But once I grounded myself in the principle of accepting the best idea, no matter what, no matter where it comes from, I accept it. Okay? So just as I don't think anyone should accept a flat earth because the totality of the evidence does not support that claim. Okay? So we should not be choosing only some evidence that does that. Okay. So just a few more quotes. I'll go quickly on these. Joseph Smith, he said, "Let it come from whence it may." Brigham Young, "Our religion does not clash with or contradict the facts of science." John Taylor, "We are open to truth of every kind, no matter whence it comes, where it originates." James Talmage, on his gravestone up in the Salt Lake Cemetery, you can go see this, and I love how his three titles for himself: educator, scientist, and then apostle. I don't know if those are in order of importance, but I like that order: educator, scientist, and then his ecclesiastical title. But I love that he said, "Within the gospel of Jesus Christ, there is room and place for every truth thus far learned by man or yet to be made known." Right? And this takes me back to Darwin. Today is Darwin Day. And I love where Darwin argued that before Darwin, there was an argument that also had happened about, does the sun go around the earth or does the earth go around the sun? And of course, some very good experiments, some very smart people converged on the objective truth reality that the sun is the center of our solar system and that planets go around the sun. Okay? And Darwin said, just as we now all accept that fact, we allow satellites, planets, suns, universe, all of this to happen, and we didn't think that it happens. We don't think that Earth goes around the sun because there are some magical gods that are pulling the Earth around the sun. Or what they used to think, right, when they used to think that the sun went around the Earth, they used to think that there were gods that had a chariot and that pulled the sun across the sky every morning. That was a real belief. But with science, with the new knowledge, we realize that's not correct. So you have to discard that idea and you have to accept the idea that the earth simply revolves. And so people like Galileo, if you go to Florence, you can go see his original telescopes. You can even see one of his fingers that they have on display. I don't know why that's important, but it's cool. You can see that. Okay, so that's the end of the kind of first principle. Okay, anyone, how's that sit with everyone? Accept truth, right? No matter where it comes from. Number two, I already told you that I believe in God, but I cannot believe in a God or a deity that is a deceiver. So I can't believe in this, this powerful person who also is like trying to deceive their children. Like, that makes no sense to me. Okay? I just can't believe that. So cheaters can actually be caught. You guys know this, that teachers know how to catch cheaters? Well, in the real world, there are ways to do this too. In map making and in encyclopedias and dictionaries, they used to do this all the time. They would put in like an article in an encyclopedia that is false. It's made up. And so then if someone else came out with their version of an encyclopedia and included the entry that was a false entry, you could take them to court and say, you plagiarized me. Same thing with map making. Someone would make a new map, and if it included a false, something that never exists in reality, you can take them to court and show you cheated, you plagiarized. Okay? So we know how to do this, and even faculty know how to do this with students. What is more what is better evidence for cheating? Students getting the wrong answer in the exact same way, or the right answer in the exact same way? The wrong answer in the exact same way. That's when they've all Googled some site on the internet or shared the resource, and they're all giving the exact same answer in a long written out format, but exactly the same. That I don't expect that, but I do expect them to get the right answer in the same way. And so that's fine if they've kind of said things in the same way. So we have ways of detecting cheating. Okay, so story about vitamin C. What is a disease that you get if you don't get enough vitamin C? Scurvy, right? And the evolutionary history of vitamin C is such that about 60 million years ago, when mammals were being evolved, the gene pathway that creates vitamin C, because in other animals, they can just make their own vitamin C, okay? But in mammals, it evolved away, okay? In just the New World monkeys, the Old World monkeys, and the apes and man. It evolved away. It became inactive. It's called the gulo gene. It became inactive. Why? Why do you not need vitamin C? Only if you're getting it from your diet. And it turns out all these animals started to eat a lot of fruit. They started to get many of them color vision, and they can even tell when fruit is most ripe and has the best vitamin C content and all of that. So you see that this gene that used to work in almost all mammals stopped working in this subset of mammals. And we can even go in and genetically look what happened. And we see things like a deletion. Now, if you know anything about biology, when you delete a single nucleotide in coding DNA, it shifts all of the DNA so that now all of a sudden you're out of frame. You probably introduced a stop codon too early. That's a gene killer. That like turns genes off, basically. And so something like that is what happened in the gulo gene. But when you look at it, it's not just that it happened once in the old world monkeys and once in the apes and man, once in humans. No. If you go look at every single organism, they all have the exact same turnoff mutation. Well, if every organism was created individually by a magic wand god, right, then that means that person over and over again killed that gene in the exact same way and made it look like it was evolution, but it wasn't. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. That's why I can't accept that there's a deity that would deceive us to make it look like it's evolution when it's not. Yeah? If you really want us to believe that, then put the turnoff gene in different places so that there's not an evolutionary pattern to it. So I can't accept that idea. Here's another example of kind of this same thing. You know that we all have 24 chromosomes, right? 23 chromosomes? How many do we have? 23, 24, 25? How many pairs of chromosomes do we have? We have 23, okay? And if you look, so 46 total. And if you look at the other great apes, they all have 48 total. So something must have happened along the lineage to us. And when you go and look at the chromosomes and you map them and you line them up so that the same genes are on the same chromosomes, you see that chromosome 1 matches up just fine. We all have the same length chromosomes with the same genes on our chromosome number 1. Same as the apes, the gorillas, and the chimps. That's what that means up at the top there. You got humans first, chimps, gorillas, and orangutans. But if you look at right next door at chromosome number 2, notice that we have one long big chromosome, but the other apes have 2 short chromosomes. Because what happened was a long time ago, 2 short chromosomes fused together into one big long chromosome. And the genes are in the exact same order on the short chromosomes relative to the long chromosomes. So that's how we know that they're homologous. We know that they're the same chromosomes. Right? And that's how you went from 48 total to 46. Okay? So once again, would a deity create something that looks like it was evolution if it's not evolution? Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. Okay? Also, if this deity is so concerned about evolution, he would ensure that it's not going to be taught at, his or her, institution. This, for example, if you take the Mormon view here at BYU, that's the tree that's at BYU in their museum. If the LDS Church is this church that listens to God, well, then wouldn't God tell them not to have that tree there in their museum? So you can't teach evolution, but they do. Of course, they teach evolution at BYU. And then if you go to their museum, they have all these things. If you're going to be a biology student at BYU, you have to take evolution. You have to take the class, and they teach it just like they do at any other university. Okay, so my other principle is, if I'm going to believe in a God, I have to believe in a God who's not trying to deceive me. That can't be part of my worldview, a God that deceives. The last three are just real quick, and these are only just really personal. If I'm going to believe in religion, if I'm going to believe in God, then I also want to strengthen my relationship to that deity, strengthen my relationship to others, and maybe even number 4 could be for everyone. It doesn't matter whether you believe in a God or not. We should treat each other with respect. It doesn't matter who we are, right? Like, everyone on this planet is a Homo sapien, and everyone deserves what everyone else deserves. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, who you want to love. None of that matters. We're all just Homo sapiens, and so we should treat each other with respect. And then we should, because I believe in making covenants, that's the other thing that I go to. I think it's important for me to make and keep covenants, and that's it. Those are my principles. See how simple it is? And I don't complicate things much beyond that. Now, one of the questions that comes up a lot is, what's the official doctrine of the church or of your religion if you're not LDS? And how does something become official? But sometimes that's asked in this way: what's the official position? Is there a difference between doctrine and position?
There is.
Yeah, those are probably different words. And so when you look at official doctrine, I would argue that, at least for the LDS Church, we're pretty clear about this. We say it's what's canonized, right? And so that means it's the scriptures and a few other things. And notice that these are the things that have been added over time. And some things have even been taken out over time, like where's it at? Like this one at the bottom. In 1921, the church removed lectures of the faith. And this is true for lots of religions. Lots of religions will add things to their official canon and take things out of their official canon. Okay? So that's kind of doctrine, but most of that stuff you have to interpret. So what I've done is I've said, okay, in my church, this is how I think about things being more official and things being less official. These are some examples. This isn't perfect, but I'm just saying, here's some ideas, right? How does that feel to you guys? It's not perfect, but would you argue that the most official stuff are the canonized texts? And then maybe after that, things like official declarations from the First Presidency, and then maybe after that, things like General Conference, right? Maybe, and so forth, right? All the way down to other stuff, books and other materials. It's not perfect, but at least I can think about that. So when we talk about the official position of the church in regard to evolution, what is the official position? Does anyone know? Yeah? That's why you're here? Well, I didn't know when I was your age either. When I was going to BYU in 1992, I would go to my Old Testament class, and I would get fed all of the quotes that were all anti-science, anti-evolution. And then I'd go to my biology class, and I'd get all the pro-science and pro-evolution quotes. And I would leave utterly confused. And it wasn't just me. Many students were experiencing this. So in 1992, BYU said, we're going to have an official packet. They put together all of the quotes sent it up the line to the general authorities in the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, and the leadership offices of the women, the General Women's Young Relief Society and Young Women's presidencies as well. And then they sent it back, and when they sent it back, they only had 4 documents. Like they literally sent out dozens and dozens of documents, and when it got sent back, they said these are the only 4 that you can put in the packet. And this is what's been delivered to students since 1992 as the official position of the church, and it's these 4. Okay? Now, what do they say? We're not going to go through all the details, but you can look this up online and read them. 1909, quick summary, it's the most anti-science, anti-evolution. It does have some of that in it. But then it caused problems, it didn't fix things. In 1910, they started to back away from it, and they gave a new position statement. And then in 1925, they backed even further away and just laid down the principles that they wanted to stick to it. And none of the anti-evolution, anti-science stuff stayed in the 1925 statement. By the way, it's important to realize these dates. 1909, that's 100 years after Darwin's birth, 50 years after the publication of Origin of Species. And that's why they had to respond to this, because all the newspapers were saying, what does the LDS Church think about evolution on the 100th anniversary of Darwin's birth and the 50th anniversary of the publication of Origin of Species? And then in 1925, there was a trial going on in Arkansas, the Scopes monkey trial, which also caused a big hoopla in the United States about who accepts evolution. And they went once again to the LDS Church. What do you guys think? And this was the First Presidency's response essentially to that ask. Okay? And then in 1992, there was these volumes written called Encyclopedia of Mormonism. And there's an entry in there. That entry restates some of the parts of the first 3, none of the anti-evolution, none of the anti-science stuff. And it says, just let scientists do what they need to do, basically. Okay? So if you want to know more about that, you can go look up the BYU Evolution Packet. Again, here's some of the quotes. I don't want to deal with too much. Just in the middle here, one of the important things that was left in is the Church of Jesus Christ declares man to be the direct and lineal offspring of deity. So man is the child of God. Okay? And then the one at the bottom there, leave geology, biology. Let scientists do what scientists do. So the church basically has stepped away and said, we're not stepping on scientists' toes. As soon as science decides something, that's great. And then they said this in the 1910 statement, which I love. That which has been demonstrated, we accept with joy. That's important because that's 1910. What have we learned about evolution since 1910? A lot. In 1910, we still didn't even understand the mechanisms of mutation, genetic drift, gene flow, or non-random mating. The only mechanism really that we were starting to kind of understand was natural selection. We didn't know about DNA. We didn't know about tons of stuff. So evolution has only been more demonstrated since this moment in time. And so I always argue that the church shouldn't have any problem with evolution because evolution's been demonstrated. It shouldn't have any problem with it. Okay? Shameless plug, by the way, I created a YouTube channel called Accept Truth with Joy based on that thing. And if you want to, you can go look at that. I interview faithful scientists. For example, I interviewed Dr. Bybee once on that. Wait, Dr. Bybee's okay. And other scientists. And also I answer questions on there, kind of like we're going to do tonight in a video format. In 2016, in the New Era, there was this article written, what does the church believe about evolution? No author was given. We don't know who wrote it. We have ideas if we think who wrote it, but we don't know for sure. It didn't say First Presidency at the bottom, so I don't know how official it is, but it's now being used as the thing that they send out to stake presidents and bishops when they get the question, what does the church think about evolution? They're now being sent to this instead of, or in addition to, the BYU Evolution Packet. And I'll just point out that the very first sentence there now answers the question that I asked you. What's the church's official position? There is no position. So it's an agnostic position. The church is agnostic. Wait, on this issue. If you go to the Life Science Museum as well, they have an entire wall dedicated to answering this question. Notice right up above, they got the 1910 statement there about accept that which has been demonstrated, and then they also repeat the 2016 statement. So just reiterating this. They also recently added an organic evolution topic in their church history topics. You can go check that out. It doesn't say anything new. It just restates some of the stuff, and it gives a little bit of context to when different statements have been said. So that's about it, okay? So my last few thoughts. It is okay to have some disagreement in your worldview. You do not have to figure everything out. It is okay. It is okay to be uncertain. It's okay to not know. Okay? I think that I grew up thinking the world was black and white and that I had most of the answers. Like as a missionary, I thought I knew everything. I was ready to just tell everyone what the exact answer was to every question. But I've now come to the point in my life where it's okay to have disagreement in your worldview. It's okay to not know. And to kind of work through those things. Because guess what? That's how it is in science. And I haven't decided to divorce myself from science. Like, science is tough. Science has disagreements. Science has conflict. I think that we need much more humility from science, from scientists. But I also think we need that from religion and from theologians. And I think that whenever we make decisions, whatever that decision is going to lead to, whether it's a policy in law, whether it's a policy in a church organization or whatever, I think that decisions need to be based on evidence. I don't like decisions being based on gut feelings or on, I don't think that I should give that person as many freedoms as I enjoy because they, for whatever reason, love someone that I don't love. So I think that we need to be more humble and know that we just don't know everything. And so let's try to maximize freedoms for people and just realize that we need to be a little bit more humble about that. I think that scientists have done a poor job at communicating what we mean by science. Case in point, the word theory. What does theory mean? What does it mean for most people out in the world?
Hypothesis?
Not even that, just like a guess, right?
Yeah.
I got this theory, if I put my pants on right leg first and then left leg, I'm going to have a great day. And if I do the other way, it's not going to be great, right? Something like that. But what do we mean in science?
Is that proven?
Any of my students should know the answer to this. It's as good as it gets. In other words, a theory is the maximum point at which we're trying to get to. There's nothing beyond theory. Theory is the best. Theory is the crown of science. All facts, all hypotheses, all laws, all predictions, all experiments, all of that go in together to make a theory. So a theory is the crown. The theory is as good as it gets. That's not what most people think of when we say theory. We have failed. We need to do a better job. Scientists need to do a better job at communicating what we mean and this was so apparent during COVID, right? Scientists didn't do a very good job at the beginning of COVID saying, we don't really understand, but right now this is our best, what we think we ought to be doing. And then it was uncomfortable for people when 2 months later, the instructions changed a little bit. People were like, wait a second, I thought scientists knew, and they don't understand it. Scientists give the best answer given the best data that we have. And sometimes that changes. And so we need to do a better job as scientists communicating what we mean when we say science. So I give myself, I need to do better in that. Second to last point. We have learned a lot about evolution since Charles Darwin. So even though you guys all know I love Darwin, right? Today's Darwin Day. I've got a big Darwin on my back. I'm wearing Darwin socks. I basically love Charles Darwin, right? But we need to do a better job at teaching people that we've learned a lot about evolution since Charles Darwin. There's a lot of stuff that we've learned. And then finally, that which has been demonstrated, we just need to accept. And I don't know how else to teach people this that are religious, especially if they come from a really fundamental religion, like, I don't know, Seventh-day Adventists or Baptists, where they're really, really It doesn't matter. You've got to come to the point to where if something's been demonstrated in science, you got to accept it. And that's hard. I know it. I get it. That's hard to do. I had to go through this for my own self. So, okay, so that's my introduction. Now I'm here to address any questions you guys have. So you can ask anything you want to ask. This is where we now just open it.
You say accept the best idea. How do you know that your religion's the best idea, or what?
I don't claim that. I know some people do. I no longer claim that. I used to claim that, but I don't claim that anymore.
I remember on the slides you guys said best idea. So what does that mean then? Is it just like religious? I mean, not religious, but like scientific like evidence? Is that what you're talking about?
For most things, if it's an issue that can be addressed by science, then we should let the evidence direct us in the direction of that, right? If it's a religious idea, then that's where I have now decided I can choose what I want to choose to be a religious idea. Like, that's fine, right? Like, if I choose that I'm not going to drink alcohol, okay, that's my choice. But what I shouldn't do, though, is legislate a rule that then prohibits other people not drinking alcohol. Because if that's not against their religion, then I shouldn't do that, right? So that's where there are certain things that you can choose to do that's part of your own religious worldview. And as long as that's not then imposed, especially through legislative efforts on other people to impose their freedoms, then I'm like, fine, believe what you want to believe, that's fine. Again, go back to my 5 principles. I'm not worried about the details of that. I'm just like, treat each other well, right? Like, that's really important when it comes to my religion.
I'm curious what your take on coffee, Coke, and tea are.
I personally, I wish the church would just step back and just say, have less kind of descriptive word of wisdom and be just more like, here's a word of wisdom. I kind of wish, because what have they had to do? Every few years they have to keep updating it and going, well, this now includes this product and this product, but not this product, right? And it just, sometimes it seems kind of silly and pejorative. So personally, I wish they would just kind of step back, but that's not my pay grade. I'm not in those discussions. Does that answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So could you go back to your 5 principles?
Sure.
I want to take a picture, that's why.
Oh, you want to take a picture of
it?
it? They're not very good principles, but you can, there we go.
Okay. So let me take a picture first and then my question.
Okay.
The question is they accept truth and knowledge, no matter where it comes from. So the problem is that we have serious problem of what is truth.
Yeah.
So for example, if we say that light is a particle, what Einstein says, if that is the only truth we know, then we have a problem, because today we know that the photon is actually a wave. So it becomes particle only when somebody observes. So what that means is that the classical mechanics or theory of evolution is only working principles. It works in the real world, but they may not be true.
That's correct.
So the reason is that the matter is all matter do not exist. Nothing exists. It only exists when it is observed. Okay, so that means that the evolution happened because somebody observed. So because of that, yeah, the what is it called? The principle is that what is it called? Natural selection is correct, but still it only correct if somebody observes. So that is because of that, this having known what is truth, we always leave some.
Sure, that's why science is tentative always.
That's it.
But the answer to incorrect science is always, at least as far as we know right now, is better science. The answer isn't ignore now science and observations and data and evidence and go to some, magic book that someone says has all the answers. Like, that's the best way to correct bad science or incorrect science is with better science.
So the thing is that the regulation is probably can be easily ignored or easily what is it called? Walked away from or can be considered incorrect. Getting pseudoscience. Or even correct science is actually pseudoscience. So that is the problem. So it is a big problem for believers. And people who do not believe, they don't have this issue.
Yeah, you choose to have a more complicated worldview if you believe. That's correct. Okay. Other questions? That was it? I mean, there's no way that can be all the questions. So please, whatever question you have, seriously, any question is free game.
You're a bishop?
I was.
Okay.
I just got released in August. I was a bishop for 6 years.
How does that like, when you're talking to people as a bishop, how does this, I mean, you don't have any, like, strange things that come up because of, like, you're a biologist or anything like that?
Not really. I wish I would have had more opportunity. I wish people would have come up to me more and said, hey, can we talk about this? But it actually rarely ever happened, surprisingly. And there was only a few times when I felt necessary for me to go and intervene in like a class or something like that when someone was saying something in class. There was only a few times when I was like, just soften the language a bit. I'd be like, we actually don't know. Or maybe we could think of it this way. Or a lot of times just the church actually doesn't have a position on that. We don't have an official stance on what that means. There's only a few times when I had to go and correct like someone giving a talk in like state conference or something like that, and after approach them and say, actually, you probably, you should think about this way. And one time, one of the leaders, the state counselor, actually took me up on that, and I was able to look at his talk, and I made comments on it, and then sent it back to him, and he was really grateful for kind of the revised version, the inspired version, right, of his talk. So I had really positive interactions for the most part.
What does, like, when you give blessings to people, like, a lot of times they think, like, oh, this is going to help you get, I guess, placebo effect, maybe it will help. But what, like, you personally, what does giving a blessing mean?
Now you're getting into my personal heart. It's a good question. And my opinion on that has changed over the years. I still find value in sacraments and in blessings and ordinances, but I tend now to bless more people's hearts to be in tune to what God might inspire them to do, instead of invoking some exact miracle that's going to happen. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Almost like God can really intervene on our hearts and can guide us to do things, especially to be the miracle for someone else, instead of perhaps God's going to part the Red Sea, for example. So, and my wife doesn't like that I've changed in that, by the way, because she still is more of a miracle maker. And so we have hard discussions about this. I said it's hard for me to talk personally about some of this stuff because I'm still in a wandering position where I'm trying to find out where I sit. But I'm okay with that now. I'm okay with uncertainty and with not knowing where I need to be. I used to not be okay with that, but I am now.
I have a question about your experience. Well, this one you talk about giving blessings. That reminds me of experience I had while I was serving. I remember I was invited by people that were not of our religion to give a blessing, and the man was very sick. He was very old, and I remember just entering in and thinking he's going to die. And of course, when you are requested a blessing in our church, we try to give a blessing because it's also an act of service. So I gave a blessing, and I remember, I don't remember the exact details of the blessing, but I made it very clear, you are not going to live much longer. And I talked about other blessings and to try to comfort him and his family, because the blessing was not only for him, it was also for his family who was present. So the main thing about when we pray in our religion is that We do it so because we want revelation from God, we want knowledge from God. We trust He's not going to lie to us, but that He's going to help us and guide us. So that was my comment.
Yeah.
Thank you. The question I had, something very interesting that you said, is that you now claim the word that our religion is, because we share a religion, sorry, is the best religion. I would like more details about that. That's very interesting to me.
Well, I'm more careful now with kind of my own language. Again, I understand that many people in the church are still going to use language like, it's the only true church and things like that. And I know for sure. I just don't use that language anymore. I believe and I hope and I'm glad that we have temples. And, so I just changed my language because that's not the way I'm thinking in my brain. But I'm more of a universalist now where I'm like, look, let's just treat each other well. And I think God will at some point figure out the ways in which everyone's going to get everything that they're supposed to get. So, yeah, I'm kind of a Mormon universalist, I guess. I don't know what that means, but I just, and so for me, for right now, I'm just changing the way that I use my language, the way I think about things. But it's not like after testimony meeting, I run up to someone and go, you can't claim that, you're gonna, I'm not gonna do that. Okay, I'm gonna nudge people here and there. I'm gonna give talks like this where hopefully some of you will listen to me and think I'm not crazy. But I'm still, again, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm still working on this. I don't know, but I tell you what, there's a lot of cool stuff in Buddhism. There's a lot of cool stuff in meditation. There's a lot of cool stuff in Catholicism. There's a lot of cool stuff in atheism, which isn't a religion, but it's a way of thinking. It's a worldview. So there's a lot of really cool things out there, and I'm just going to accept truth no matter where it comes from. I don't care anymore. I'm just accepting good ideas and truth, right?
I think that brings another question, that is, you think that some evolutionary biologists are actually demonizing religion on the pretext of organic evolution knowledge? What is your opinion about that?
Well, in everything, there's always like extremes, right? And I don't think it's ever a good idea to have this kind of, well, it's okay to have extremes, but I personally don't like it when there's someone who's got this on either side. I don't like the religion people who are like, evolutionary biologists are evil and they're terrible and they're amoral. That's bull crap. I mean, some of the best people I've ever met in my life are evolutionary biologists who are atheists. I mean, they're just so selfless and so wonderful. I mean, just some of the best people I've ever met in my life are that way. But at the same time, I don't like when someone maybe on the other side is like, you're all a bunch of idiots for believing. Like, that is just the most ridiculous thing to ever do. Like, and honestly, I've never met anyone like that. I've seen videos of people saying that, but I've never met anyone. None of my colleagues have ever been that way. So, other questions? I'm surprised I haven't gotten the question I usually get first. This is strange for me. Yeah.
So during my last bit of time in the church, I was telling myself that stories like Adam and Eve or Noah's Ark, stuff like that, academics believe differently than what the church believes, right?
Yeah.
So what I was telling myself was that that must have to be allegorical or symbolic, right?
Yeah.
And then I started to share that thought process, and then I got told, "Oh no, that would mean God has to be a liar for that."
Yeah.
Do you feel that it is possible to believe non-literally in things like a lot of stuff that happens in the Old Testament?
Yeah. Now, that's usually the first question I get is essentially, what about Adam and Eve and what about this stuff? And so let me start off with, I think it's perfectly reasonable to just think it's like what you said, it's just an allegory, it's a story or whatever. And that's where some religions have landed. Like the Catholic Church no longer says Adam and Eve is a literal story, right? And other institutions have also gone down that pathway. As far as I know, in the LDS Church, the church's feeling and position is still that they are real people, right? So to that end, but I think it's reasonable to not do that. I think you can still be a good Mormon in a sense, right? and just say it's just a story. I think that's perfectly okay. I have some Mormon evolutionary biologist colleagues who that's what they think. Okay, but some people are like, but we got to make it work. And so here's how I'll offer some options for some of you, and you can take these however you would like. Okay. First, we know that Homo sapiens evolved at least by 200,000 years ago. Okay, we know. So again, we know this because of science. The evidence is very, very strong. We know that all of those Homo sapiens lived in Africa and nowhere else. We know that there was a bottleneck where the population got maybe around about 10,000 individuals about 100,000 years ago. This is very simplified. Okay, so don't stick me on all the details of this, but this is a nice overview of what kind of happened. And then coming out of that bottleneck, some of the Homo sapiens went northeast, and went into the Middle East, and into Asia, and into Europe, and started to populate the rest of the world eventually, even coming across the Bering Strait, getting down into North and South America, and the islands of the sea, and so forth. And now we're up to even around 8 billion individuals, right? Almost. And that's the human evolution story. Okay? So whatever pathway you are now going to go, in my worldview, in my mind, has to accord with that knowledge. Okay? You can't just set all that aside and then go, oh, but I'm still going to accept blah, 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 right? Because that's not how I think you can do it. At least it doesn't jive with me easily. So there's this Adam and Eve over here. What do? Well, first, go back to the official statements of the church. The only thing the church says is first man, and Adam is the primal parent of our race. Okay? So if that's true, well, most of the time, where do we think that Adam and Eve lived? What time? Yeah, like maybe 6,000 years ago, right? Well, that means it puts them in the middle of this huge population somewhere. So there's no way that Adam and Eve can be the first man and woman if what you mean by that is just first Homo sapien. There's no way that could be if Adam and Eve lived at 6,000 years ago. So what are some other possible options? Well, maybe they were really created, or maybe Adam and Eve lived at 200,000 years ago and were part of that initial, whatever that was, population of Homo sapiens. Maybe. Or maybe at the 100,000 year mark, or anywhere in between. I mean, it really doesn't matter, right? Okay, maybe, but you've still got some issues that you got to deal with. Adam being the primal parent, in other words, the first man. Well, or maybe here. I just can't. I don't see how you can do that. So here's one mental gymnastics that you can do. You can redefine man. You can interpret man in the church's doctrine to potentially mean this: Homo sapien with spiritual offspring of God on the inside, so a son or daughter of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, and that learned the gospel and made covenants. So in other words, one way to get around this is you say Adam and Eve were the first ones to make covenants. And that's kind of what the temple teaches anyway, is that they were the first ones to make covenants. And so then it doesn't even matter when they lived. They could have lived any time along that entire time frame, and they were just the first ones in the Garden of Eden that made covenants with God and learned about the gospel, and that was it. And everyone else didn't do it. And then they were banished from the garden and had to go teach others. I mean, that's kind of a way where you can still have a literal interpretation of Adam and Eve and make it jive with the human evolution scientific story that we know. And then you have to invoke that we could still do all the saving ordinances for all the rest of those Homo sapiens. Not just the Homo sapiens since Adam and Eve, but the Homo sapiens that potentially were even before them. But now you've done one mental gymnastics and another, but you can do it. I mean, there are some LDS people who find some kind of solace in that you can still believe in a literal Adam and Eve and still make it work with what the science says. So that's one option. And there's probably 2 or 3 other good options. I'm just giving you one possible. Then you all can start to explore this in your own brain and go, oh, that kind of works, maybe not.
If they weren't the first humans, and you're going to do baptism work for people before then, at which point? What's the deadline before they're not humans?
And now you're asking the question, what makes a Homo sapien, right? And we don't know, because species don't, it's not like one moment you're Homo erectus or Homo heidelbergensis, and then you have children and now all of a sudden you're Homo sapiens. That's not the way species evolve. It takes time and it's a process. Yeah, so I don't know. If we're going to take that literal interpretation, I don't know. I don't know when that cutoff would be. All I know for sure is that by 200,000 years ago, though, we had Homo sapiens anatomically exactly like us, brains just like us, everything just like us. So you at least have to go back that far. And then you asked about like Noah's Ark.
Yeah, they don't know.
Kind of the same thing. There's no evidence of a global flood whatsoever. There's tons of evidences of floods, like floods happen all the time. So it's not a surprise that flood stories, flood mythology would be part of religious texts. Like that doesn't surprise me at all. It's also sometimes when people will say, well, when the writers were writing that, they didn't mean the entire world. They just meant, their kind of local, land. Like if you were to say, in all of the land, well, you just may mean Utah County, right? So there are other ways to potentially still accept a literal reading of Noah and the ark, but I think it's perfectly reasonable, and you can be a perfectly good religious person if you want to, and still just say it's just a story. Like that's fine. And what principles did you learn from the story? What did you learn how to treat each other better? Hopefully, I don't know. Maybe you just learned that God is spiteful and he kills lots of people. I don't know. So, but you can do the same. You could say, there was a boat, but it couldn't have been a boat that held all of the diversity of life. That's impossible. I have a whole video I have a few videos about Noah's Ark on that website that I made. So, yeah. Oh, sorry. Let's go. Her hand up first, and then I'll come right back to you.
Okay. I'll try to phrase this in a way that makes sense. But something I've noticed in the LDS religion is that the creation is very important, right? It's in the temple, it's in every book of scripture somewhere. There's reference to it or the story of it. I think in the Book of Mormon, it's even mentioned at least once, an insert from Moroni, I think, oh, this is where I would put the creation if it wasn't already in the Bible. And that's the only reason I'm not putting it. It's so important to know that you already have it from this other record. And so it's just, I don't know, it's just interesting to me that the creation is everywhere and it's clearly so important, but it also is kind of steeped in this whole thing of evolution, of the age of the earth, of all of that. And so I guess through this lens of everything we've been talking about, why do you think that is? It feels it's very important to God. If this is, if this church is following God and his teachings and everything, then clearly it seems very important to him that we know about the creation and that we know even some of the specifics of it. And yet, there's also all of this, controversy surrounding it, to the point that we've come to this place where we say, no official position, I don't know. Where we just had to say that. And so I guess through that lens, why do you think that is? Why do you think it's important?
That's a great question. I have a few thoughts. One, humans are curious. And one of the things that we're curious about is where did we come from? What are we doing? So that's just part of being a Homo sapien, being a human, right? And this is why the LDS Church is not the only church that thinks creation is important. All religions have origin stories. And cultures have origin stories. And sometimes they're way more creative and better than Adam and Eve. I mean, the Navajo have the wolf that vomits up the diversity of life, And so there are other creation stories and creation myths that are really important. So it's not unique for humans to wonder about this and to then have and to pass on stories about origins and creation, right? So I would say that in that it could just be that this is a human, like humans have, I think this is really important, okay? But then if you do go to the, well, God thinks it's important, well, yeah. Why? I come back to my principles. I think God, if Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother are out there, right? Then they want us to know what is our relationship to them. And they want us to know what is our relationship to each other. And then we should treat them well, and we should treat each other well. And so that's why it's important to know where you came from. But your physical body is not really the big story here. The bigger story is, if you believe, right, is that inside of you, you have a spiritual offspring of Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. That's way more cool in terms of a religious experience, right? And simply where did your physical body come from? Because your physical body came from your mortal parents, not from your heavenly parents. Right? So those are some of the thoughts I would have on that.
That does make sense. That does make sense. I didn't think about that.
And if you think about the statements up there, first man, Adam is the primal parent of our mate, we're literal offspring of God. Well, yeah, that's talking about the spirits. It's not talking about the physical bodies. But we tend to focus on the physical bodies as being the big problem. What we should just do is go, oh, well, the physical bodies came about through evolution. And then if you choose, you can believe that there's a spirit inside of there, and that spirit has a relationship to deity and has a relationship to him and to me, right? We're brother and sister then, right? So there, I ought to treat you even better. Oh, I wish that's how it would happen. But sometimes it feels like we just forget about just treating each other well, right? Which is really kind of the main point.
How kind of a follow-up question, but like you kind of mentioned like scientists are like bad at communicating science. And I feel like if that like idea that, all this creationism and all this science kind of comes back to that idea of like we need to treat each other well, how can we use science to communicate that? Or how can scientists communicate that in a setting where I guess where it is just like we're talking about science, we're not talking about.
Well, I think scientists do this, and I think the new atheists do this. They're like, we can have morals and we can treat each other really well. We don't have to invoke a sacred text that imposes those morals upon us, right? And so that's being a humanist essentially, right? And so I think that we could learn a lot from science by invoking humanist principles. But then if you choose to have on top of that, a relationship with deity, that's fine. Like, I do that. I'm doing that. But what I've decided to do is not for sure then impose my particular religious beliefs onto others and force them to have to also abide by my particular religious beliefs. Right? I've decided not to do that anymore. Where before I always thought I got to convince everyone that what I'm doing is the exact right way, right? I decided to kind of step away from that a little bit. Yeah.
So I heard probably 6 years ago that the Native Americans came from Asia, not Jerusalem. Is that true or not? I don't actually know.
Well, for sure, yeah. There is the preponderance of evidence for sure says that Native North and South Americans came through Asia through the Bering Strait, for sure. There are a few studies out there that show there might be this little tiny genetic signature that maybe has something to do with what might be a genetic signature that might have existed, however many thousands of years ago over in Jerusalem, right? But that's a lot. And now you put one assumption on top of another assumption on top of another assumption. If I were to write an NSF grant and try to get the government to fund me to find a genetic signature of the Hebrew of the people from Jerusalem in the native populations of North and South America, it's a question that is answerable by science, but there's so many assumptions that would have to be built in. You've got a founder effect. You've got genetic drift, you've got time, you've got all of these things that are happening. So you can actually investigate this with scientific methods, but there's so many assumptions built in that NSF would basically laugh at you and go, that there's no way you could ever find the evidence that you would need in order to say, oh yeah, there's a genetic signature here. So everything that we see is what we would expect to see, knowing that people actually came across the Bering Strait, whether or not there were other people that came across in a boat in a small population. Yeah, we're seeing exactly what we expect to see. Yeah. So it's neither, again, that's neither disproving the Book of Mormon, but it's also not saying the Book of Mormon is true because of genetic evidence. It's agnostic to it.
In my mind, I'm having conflict. How does it not disprove the Book of Mormon? Or like, what's your argument for yourself? I guess. I don't know.
Well, the Book of Mormon itself never claims that all of the people of North and South America are descendants of Lehi or of the brother of Jared. That's not what the Book of Mormon claims. For many, many years, that's the way some Mormons taught the Book of Mormon, as if the Book of Mormon was a history of the entire North and South America, or at least of Central American, Native peoples' history. But the Book of Mormon never claims that. People have claimed that. Okay, so, and I'm not a scriptorian, so I don't go into the details of this, but I would just argue that we imposed that, and that's why I don't know how many years ago it was, back in, I want to say 2004, somewhere around there, when they changed the introduction of the Book of Mormon, and it said no longer are mainly it's like, this is just a story of some of those descendants, right, or something like that. I can't remember how it says it, but they switched the introduction to be like, oh, well, actually, this is just a small story of what happened in North and South America.
Wasn't the brother of Jared like from the Tower of Babel? So
Yeah.
Asian or
Yeah. Well, Middle Eastern still, but yeah. Yeah.
So in the Book of Mormon, it shares that the people of the Lamanites were cursed with darker skin. But a lot of that has been like translated, oh, it's African American people, but that's not right. That's what they're really meaning is Native American cultures in that sense, right? Is that?
I'm not a scriptorian. For me, that's a racist scripture. I think it should be out of the Book of Mormon, personally. I think it's terrible that that's written that way. But that's because I think we should treat everyone equally the same, no matter the color of their skin. And we shouldn't curse people and say that means they have a different color. I think that's terrible.
And I know the intention, I don't think, is to say that they are just bad.
I don't know. It could have been. I don't know.
I hope not.
I hope not too. But a lot of things are in a lot of writings that are discriminatory in nature, and it's because it's an imperfect person who's writing it with their own worldview, and sometimes their worldview is racist. So I hope it's not. But if it is, I'm happy to just call it out and say that's racist. It shouldn't be in there. Because I just accept truth no matter where it comes from. I don't care. I don't care if part of it is not okay.
So what are you guys talking about in the Bible? Or
Well, in the Bible, there's also lots of racist scriptures too. But yeah, in the Book of Mormon.
didn't Joseph Smith use the seer studs, which?
Yeah, I don't think he was inspired in those verses. That's the way I interpret that. That's my own interpretation of that. I don't like those scriptures. I don't think they should be in there. I think you easily could have said, these people are not obeying the commandments. Okay.
Now, I do have this scripture, it's one of my favorite scriptures when we think about in terms of race, is in the Book of Mormon. It's actually written by the same person, according to the Book of Mormon. The author of this verse was the same one who explained, yeah, actually, Lamanites got dark skin. And he says, for none of these iniquities come from the Lord, for he does that which is good among the children of men. And he doth nothing save to be plain unto the children of men, and he inviteth them all to come unto him and partake of his goodness. And he denieth none that come unto him, black and white, bond and free, male and female, and he remembers the heathen, and all are alike to God, both Jew and Gentile. So that's very, very, very the opposite of racist, if you would ask to me.
Right. But again, now we're all just kind of cafeteria, You know, like, I love that scripture. I do too. I love that scripture.
Then stop being young from.
Right. And again, this is why I'm okay with, that's why I love President Uthor, where he's like, there's been mistakes. And it's okay. It's okay to recognize that there's been mistakes. That doesn't mean that you have to throw everything out. I mean, if we did that all the time, we'd have to throw everything out, even in science. Science has mistakes. But we recognize that. That's why we have error bars. We're okay with mistakes in science. Like, we understand there's going to be outliers. There's going to be times when you're wrong. Like, it's okay to have that. That's why I always just come back to my principle. I'm just going to accept what's true. And I know that it's not okay to treat other people discriminately because of their color, their skin, or who they love, or whatever, right? So that's just my worldview, and that's just where I am. And again, I know that sometimes the way that I talk, when I'm like, now I'm in front of you, I would be a lot more softer if I were probably in a gospel doctrine class on Sunday. But I'm being very plain with you guys about this. So, you know, in a gospel doctrine class, if you were to bring that up, I'd probably be like, you know, there's probably other ways we could think about that. And it's probably not good that we, you know, but I mean, the church has a history of being racist. We didn't give priesthood to people of color for so many years. So, but it's okay. I can recognize, like, I'm okay with just recognizing that. It's not okay. It's not okay that that's what we have, right? So, I know those are hard. It's the same thing in the Bible when it's like, it's okay to sell slave. Like, they basically say slavery is okay in many parts of the Bible, right? It's like, that's not okay. Those verses are bad. You guys are like, what a weirdo this guy is. I know, I'm a weirdo. I'm just fumbling through this life trying to figure things out. I don't have all the, I told you that at the beginning. I told you a lot of the times my answer is, I don't know what the answer is. Yeah.
So just one thing, this one thing that I've heard taught a lot about is that I've heard a lot of people say that evolution didn't really start until the fall of Adam and Eve, but obviously we have evidence of evolution from before that. So I was just wondering how you kind of reconcile.
Oh, evolution's been happening. Evolution for biological entities has been happening for 3.5 billion years on the planet. But chemical evolution, when we got to the point of having the first kind of life, right? Even that kind of evolution has been happening since 4.5 billion years ago. And then you have interstellar, you have kind of cosmic evolution, because the astronomers even talk about evolution in terms of cosmology, right? So that word can be used for lots of different things. But biological evolution has happened for 3.5. Maybe what people are referring to is they think just human evolution maybe only happened since the fall of Adam. But again, I don't agree with that either, because I think that there have been lots of humans on the planet before Adam and Eve, personally. I think that if Adam and Eve were real, right? So, yeah.
What is cosmological evolution? Is that biological or just like stars?
Yeah, it's like star formation and stuff like that. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
So if you were to do your mental gymnastics of Adam, right? So how is he your first parent again?
He can only, in my worldview, if you take this approach, the only way he can be the first parent is because he's also the first one to make covenants.
But how's our relationship with him? Like, would that be by blood?
Not necessarily. I don't think Adam and Eve necessarily are the absolute, like, all genetic entities came from them, right? They're two other humans in this whole span of human history. So that's why when it's primal parent, it's kind of like in the way, are you literally of the house of you don't remember who patriarchal? Well, there's this whole thing like, where do you belong? I'm adopted into the house of Abraham. I don't know how many of you are adopted. Any other adoptions in here? No, you guys are all literal descendants?
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know. Okay. Well, you're in patriarchal blessing. It should say what lineage you're in, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you're adopted, in the LDS church, when you become baptized, you become adopted into the family of the Abrahamic covenant, right? And so Abraham becomes my father. Whether or not he's my genetic father,
Because you follow his.
because I've made the covenant to be part of that. So that's why I say Adam and Eve were the first ones to make covenants, and so therefore they're the primal parents, because they're the first ones to make covenants. And we can all be adopted into the family of Adam and Eve via covenant making as well. Right? That's one way to get around it. Yeah.
How, I think you said earlier, like, man, like choosing to be a scientist, or being a scientist and choosing also like to be a person of faith. It just, you're choosing like, okay, it's just gonna be complicated. I'm just gonna confuse myself sometimes. That's okay. That's awesome. But I think, for a lot of people don't choose that. A lot of people who are religious find strength in simplicity, which I think is admirable in its own way. And I just wonder how, when these questions arise, like this is kind of a sampling error in this room. This is like people, mostly like university students, a lot of us studying biology of some kind. And so how do you have conversations like this? Maybe not exactly like this, but even in this realm with people who've kind of chosen that to say like, oh, there's this theory of evolution, there's science, and just kind of go, oh, I'm not looking, I will not be looking. That's not true. That's how do you have those conversations? I'm talking about my dad.
Yeah, and I was about ready to say, oh, talking about your family, aren't you? Yeah. I've had to have these conversations with my own siblings at times, with uncles and aunts. I mean, my parents are on board with it now, but it's tough. But people are going to listen to you because of who you are. So first and foremost, be a good person. Treat them well. Don't be demeaning. And then when you have the opportunity, what I find is the best strategy is actually asking questions of them about what they believe and helping them get to a place to where they might even find contradiction. And then you can say, it's okay. So, have you ever thought of, and then you give a moment of instruction. But if you come in guns a-blazing, I'm going to teach you everything, they're just going to shut you out, right? So you have to ask questions, be a good listener, and sometimes that's hard. And so if you can't do that, then don't do it. For your own mental health, don't do it because it's too hard. But if you're willing to kind of do that, and I'd be happy to talk to you later. I have a whole bunch of strategies that I try to use with people like that. But you also have to realize sometimes people are just not going to be willing to listen. Okay, and that, again, I don't care what they believe. The problem is when they then vote in ways that are based on their beliefs that then limit the freedoms of others. And that's when it becomes really hard, right? And so it's tough because you want to try to be an activist and fight those battles, but at the same time you want to maintain those relationships, right? And not just divorce yourself from those relationships. Some people can do both and some people can't. So you need to figure out mentally, your own mental health, where do you sit on there? And if you want to be more of an activist like I am, then you can do that. And you can do things like this, or you can on Instagram or Facebook or wherever you're at, you can post little things. If you go to my Facebook post when I posted about Darwin Day, it started a huge storm with someone I don't even know, and they just like falsehoods, and all these things. But I tried to have a conversation with that person and be like, well, that's interesting. Have you considered this? Or actually, the evidence shows this. Here's 3 cited, peer-reviewed papers that demonstrate that, and things like that. I don't know if that helped.
It does.
Yeah. But the most important thing is they have to be able to listen to you because they trust you. So maintain the trust, make good questions, and then when you have the moment to teach. Make sure you're teaching right with good evidence. So don't just say something you're not, because we don't help anyone by making bad arguments. Yeah.
So going back to your first principle, where you were saying accept truth and knowledge, do you have like a criteria that you do that with?
Well, with science, we have objective criteria, right?
Yeah.
Because that's pretty, sometimes there's still things where there could be relative, the same amounts of evidence that are saying this is the best answer or this is the best answer. But for most things, if the evidence converges, then we get this emergent truth, right? Truth, little t, because in science we never claim anything is absolutely true, right? But you have this emergent objective truth. So that's my first measure for that. And that can be done with lots of scientific claims that can be addressed by things of this world. Claims of the supernatural, the only measure that I mean, the thing that I use, but again, I'm not going to invoke this on anyone else, is I still believe that God can talk to my spirit and to my mind. And so I believe that there can be a divine communication. And, we call it the spirit sometimes in the church or whatever, But the problem is sometimes what I think is true through the spirit might conflict with what someone else thinks is true, right? Through the spirit. So how do you measure it? Well, this is where, again, I'm now much more careful about saying, I know for true, for absolute. My language is much softer now. And that way, I don't have to necessarily be in conflict with someone else of a different faith. Okay? And then it comes back to my principle of just treating each other well. As long as we're both trying to focus on that, we should be okay.
Yeah. I'm not so much asking about the faith and the spiritual, because it's hard to prove.
Right.
Right. But I'm just curious on do you think, because I've always wondered if, I'm not disputing DNA, I'm not being anti-science with this question or anything, but I'm wondering at what point do you look at objective science, how can I say this, and if we keep on looking at objective science, does that lead to possibly stagnant science? Or when as a young scientist,
Yeah.
do you say okay, this is objective, I know this to be true, but then when do you go against it to see if there's new discovery?
There is no other place where we are more critical of what we already know than science. You don't get notoriety because you once again showed something that we already know. The way you get notoriety is because you find evidence that contradicts something that we have thought for years and years and years. And so scientists are always doing this. This is all we ever do is sit and go, I think you're wrong. And I'm going to go collect data and evidence, or I'm going to reanalyze your data and your evidence and show you're wrong. So exactly what happens is what happens in science all the time. This is where I don't think we've done a very good job at teaching the public about what really happens in science. Scientists are we are each other's worst critics. We're always criticizing each other's work. And if I can overturn what mayfly specialists have thought for years, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be so happy that I did it, because the evidence points us in that new direction. Yeah. And if someone comes up with an idea that we think is great, it's going to get criticized and criticized until it's shown that it is great. A good example is cold fusion, right? Remember people up at the University of Utah thought they'd come up with this great idea as cold fusion. It immediately got tested, and it was shown to be not correct.
Yeah, but that goes back to accepting truth. That's the part that I'm trying to.
Well, okay, let's use Darwin Day, right?
Yeah.
Before Darwin, there was this idea of evolution, but no one understood what was the mechanism. One of the main things people thought, maybe one idea, was Lamarckian evolution.
Yeah.
Well, Darwin said, I don't agree with that.
I'm talking about today's science. As a young scientist, how would you maybe just accept truth? Obviously Lamarckism, transformationism, I think is the other one. That's disproven. But as a young scientist, how do you go from objective truth and trying to find new things? I understand that you're saying that scientists criticize it, other scientists will criticize it, but at what point, I don't know if this makes sense, at what point do you entertain ideas that are against maybe the grain?
It happens all the time.
So just do it?
Yes, you can do it. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. This happens all the time. All the time. Today, our Darwin Day speaker, everyone thought, oh, pigeons are just pigeons. No, actually, she says, no, pigeons are not just pigeons. There's Boston pigeons and there's New York pigeons. Right? That was kind of one of the points. Did you go to the talk today at noon?
Yeah.
Yeah. She showed, no, there's a difference between the population in Boston relative to the population in New York. It was actually that headline that got her a line on Saturday Night Live, because the New York Times reported on that, and then Saturday Night Live made a joke about it in their weekend update where they're like, scientists are saying that Boston pigeons are different from New York pigeons. They said, yeah, the Boston pigeons have been telling the blackbirds they need to leave. Something like that. So yeah, I mean, this happens all the time. Happens all the time. And if what's your major? Yeah. Yeah. So you have the ability to explore any avenue that you want to explore, and you can go against the grain and you can try to find where science has got it wrong. And if you do, it'll be great and we'll welcome it. That's the other thing about science. Science should be humble enough that if any new idea replaces an old idea, we're like, great, that's great. And we throw out the old idea and we take the new idea. Yeah.
Do you feel like the LDS community was supportive of you choosing a path in biology?
Well, for sure, initially. I mean, I was in the BYU pre-med zoology program, right? So it's like, you're going to become a doctor. But no, I mean, in that community, there was a lot. Once I decided to become an academic, yeah, they were really supportive. And I think there's again, for the most part, yes, but of course there are some people who are LDS who think that I am indoctrinating youth to damnation and that I am, getting people away from their conservative Christian values and, all of these things. Of course there's people who think that. Yeah, the philosophies of men mingled with scripture, all of that. I get that from pushback from people as well. I haven't necessarily got that from leaders, but from other people, yeah, uncles.
The majority positive.
But majority, yeah, positive, yeah. I mean, my parents were so proud of me to do what I did, and then they listened, and they became proponents of evolution. I mean, they really didn't have an opinion either way, I don't think, growing up, other than they read Bruce McConkie and, and some other people who said that evolution is evil. But then as soon as I told them it doesn't have to be that way, and then they're like, oh, because they trusted me. So my parents listened to me and they changed their mind. Yeah.
I've got a question. I think it kind of goes back to a couple questions ago, but I think essentially like principles like how can you accept objective evidence but also question it at the same time? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So again, you go in and you say, so like for example, in mayflies, I'll do my specialty is mayflies, right? The evolution of flight. We don't know how flight evolved in insects. There's a few ideas out there. One of the ideas is that it was the backside of insects got bigger and bigger and bigger and kind of were these gliding mechanisms. And insects crawled up onto plants and then they would kind of glide down. And then eventually those gliding things became articulated, innervated, and musculated and could do powered flight. That was one of the hypotheses. Well, I study mayflies, where I see mayflies have these abdominal gills that go along their abdomen, and in the water they flap them. Well, that kind of looks like flapping wings. So one of my hypotheses is maybe instead of a gliding structure, maybe it was actually a flapping structure that was used as like a gill in the water, and then when they came out of the water, it became a flapping structure that was used for flight. Okay, so I understood what one of the hypotheses was. I have a different hypothesis, and now I'm going to go and gather data to try to support or refute both of those hypotheses. So that's what I'm doing.
So would you accept one of those hypotheses?
No, you have multiple hypotheses, and you gather data, and you let the data decide what the answer is.
And then based on your, I guess like, so based on that data, you would accept one of the hypotheses, right?
Yeah.
And then would you continue to question it?
Yeah, you can keep gathering more data. So maybe originally that was based on a couple genes that I sequenced, but then now I've sequenced the entire genome. And I go and look at this again. Oh my goodness, I was wrong because actually this shows this. Yeah, so then you change your mind. It's okay to be wrong.
So do you think is there ever a time when you would accept something as true, but stop looking for other?
Yeah, I mean, again, like a round Earth, right? Like a spherical Earth. I don't know that we have to continue to perform those experiments anymore. I mean, there's plenty of people who have first eyewitness, who have we've taken pictures, we've got video, we've done measurements, we've done enough work here to demonstrate that the Earth is spherical. So, I mean, again, in science, it's always tentative. Maybe there's some new observation that will show that we were all wrong. You know, like Rahul was saying, maybe this is all just true because we've observed it once or whatever, and some new observation will show that we're wrong. Yeah, science always says that, but come on, the Earth is round, right? So there are some things where the emergent truth is just so obvious because it has so much evidence behind it that it's not going to be overturned. And typically that's when things are called theories. And a theory could be overturned, but mostly what will happen is the underlying stuff gets a little bit modified and you just keep tweaking and tweaking that theory, like evolutionary theory. We keep tweaking it and tweaking it. You know, we didn't understand epigenetics until just a few years ago, right? We didn't understand molecular evolution until we understood DNA. So it's taken a while for us to get to our knowledge, but it's not like we've thrown out the idea of evolution. We just keep tweaking our knowledge of that until it's getting better and better and better. Yeah.
And we do that with every science, every single one of them.
Yeah. Great questions. Any others? I just keep going as long as you guys want to ask questions. I have no time limit here. Yeah.
This might be more of a history question, but I haven't ever actually found an answer. Why do you think in the Word of Wisdom, not as it's like originally written, but as we like come to understand it, why tea? Like why that plant specifically?
It wasn't a plant specifically.
Okay.
It was tea.
Okay.
And that was, you know, early, I don't remember the exact dates, but for whatever reason, tea and coffee seemed to, for the leaders of the church at that time, they thought those were the hot drinks that were being described. They thought that they had properties that were leading to certain problems. And so that became part of the word of wisdom. Again, that's why if I could go back in time and I could advise the leaders of the church, like if they came to me as a biologist, what should we do about this word of wisdom? Should we start telling what specific products people can't eat or drink? I would have said no. Just keep it at the word of wisdom. Eat meat sparingly. You know. In fact, I would say, if anything, you ought to go into the best science that exists and update what you're saying. You know, exercise and you know these kinds of things. But I kind of wish they would pull it back because they've had to now go in and start to go, well, and now vaping's not okay, and now da 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 is not okay, and now da 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 is not okay, right?
Coke wasn't allowed up at BYU for quite a few
Right.
years at all, or anything.
But now you can get caffeinated drinks at BYU for
No
heaven's sakes.
problem.
And they even sell some drinks that in their ingredients list have green tea extract. Ooh, yeah. And so and I don't think the buyers actually realize that. I think if they knew that was in there, I think they would stop buying those. But yeah, because you can have certain kinds of teas, or you can't have anything from the green. Now they've said from the green tree plant, from this specific plant, but you can have these other teas. And it's like, well, what about mate, right? And all of a sudden they're like, oh, because mate has all these properties as well that are similar to many of the teas, right? And so it's a mess. That's why I wish they would just kind of step back on that.
Do you know, again, this is more of a history thing, but do you know when it became like that plant? Like
There's a good article. If you send me an email, I can send you back. There was a BYU professor that did a historical analysis of this, and I can send it to you if you want. I don't remember. It was like I want to say 1860, somewhere around there was when it changed, or when they specifically said tea and coffee. Anything else?
I would just like to say that all of us that are LDS scientists go right along with what Dr. Ogden is saying.
Maybe. I mean, we still have variety. Like I've talked to the BYU folks, and some of them are even a little bit more liberal than me on their way that they think about things, and some of them are a little bit more kind of more strict to the gospel as well. So there's a little bit of diversity, but what all of us do is accept the science. We accept evolution as the best explanation for the diversity of life on planet Earth. We accept plate tectonics. Like, we don't question that the continents are moving, right? We accept general relativity as the best explanation for how bodies move relative to each other in the universe, you know. So we all accept that kind of stuff, but each of us have different ways how we kind of do this, you know, making it fit with your specific worldview. And I tend to be kind of a little bit more like open and liberal in some of that way, but I know some of my colleagues that are even a little bit further than me, if you think of it. What? Yeah, but that's okay. I'm like, I love diversity. That's why I study biology. So I'm actually fine with diversity. I don't like that we would all have to exactly have the exact same worldview. That's why I hope all of you just leave and think about where do you feel that you need to fit and stuff. And then just make sure that you're not hurting other people, right? We ought to be treating each other well. So that's why I always come back to just, let's not hurt each other. Let's find the particular worldview that's best for us on what we choose we want to do, as long as it's not hurting other people. That's where religion has gotten itself into trouble. So when they impose things, views that have to then be some norm in the society.
Do you go to the temple?
Yeah. I sang at the temple dedication of the Orem Temple. I was in the choir. You're like, state president needed to rethink that. I believe. I choose to believe. I mean, that's my best argument I can give someone. Like, if I'm talking to a new atheist right here, right? The best argument I can say is that, look, I choose to believe. I've had experiences in my life that for me were powerful enough, that were spiritual, powerful experiences that have led me to this moment where I'm going to be like, I choose to. Because I have as many reasons not to, and to maybe stop believing, right? But I have just as many reasons to believe. And so I'm in this moment of where I get to choose my faith. And I just choose. I choose to believe. And it works for my family, too. And I find that I did a lot of good as a bishop. I really loved being a bishop and spending the church's money on helping people. It was awesome. Like, I really loved being a bishop and helping youth who are struggling with who they are and where their place in the world is. And people who thought they had committed, some sin, and just kind of helping them with what I think is the mercy of God in their lives. And so, like, I still believe that stuff. What I just have I've decided is that I'm just going to be a little bit softer on how confident I am in what I think I know is true. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
And I want to be there because I want to continue to be a force for kind of good in the church to get people to think a little bit more broader at times. I want to help women be more powerful in the church, and so I'm a voice for feminism in the church and trying to give them as many opportunities as they possibly can. So those kinds of things. I'm just trying to help, but I do believe still. Who knows? Maybe in 4 years I'll be here and I'm wrong. I don't know. Or maybe in 4 years I'll be way even over here. No, actually I've had a few more experiences and I'm now ready to say this. I'm trying to just be honest about who I am and where I am. But right now I believe. I believe. Should I sing? Don't make me sing. You guys sing this out loud. Don't make me sing. I love that one.
That's why you sing in a choir, right?
Yeah. Actually, I'm not a very good singer. It's because my wife can sing. She can really sing, and so I got to tag on to her coattails on that one.
How does that work? Because her pitch should be way higher than yours.
Her what?
Her pitch, her voice register.
Right, but because she's such a good singer, they asked her, and they're like, your husband can come along.
Okay, that's what you mean.
What you have to do is like I do, just open your mouth and they think you're singing, right?
Yeah.
So you,
Anything else? You guys had some really good questions. Yeah.
So going back to evolution, I'm just curious, because, so there's a tree of life, right?
Yeah.
And then it branches off, and then this question is the best way, because I feel like when say Luca, like Luca can be like the last common ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
But like, how close do you think, or where are we at in this like metaphor of a tree to find like the seed?
Yeah, so I think you're referring, so you mean like biogenesis, like where did life come from? Where did we get to get to Luca, to get to the last universal common ancestor? Or
Yeah, because is Luca not, I always thought it was just like last unknown common ancestor.
last universal common
Oh,
ancestor?
universal. And then like if we find, as we work backwards.
Yeah, I mean, right now, our understanding is that there were populations of these early cellular component entities that existed, right? And they were all going through a chemical evolution, but at some point you got this bacterial, the first kind of bacterial cells, right? And that could have been an entire population. It could have been in different parts of the world. There could have been multiple starting points that maybe we got to. But because everything shares the same genetic code, the same chirality, all of these properties, we think that life, all of life that exists today, came from a common ancestral pool of genetically competing early cells. Okay, but then it could be that in another part of Earth there could have been another population of early competing cells. Could be that right now that there are new areas where life is trying to come about, right? Could be. It's just the problem is if life already exists, it's hard for things that are not as well adapted to compete. They're probably getting out competed anyway, right? By things that are already alive, the bacteria that are already there. Okay, but what we understand is that at least for everything that's alive right now is all part of the same genetic history tree, the same great tree of life. But it wasn't a single bacterial cell. It was definitely like a population of stuff that was living all at the same time.
Also, when they say common ancestor, it's not a single.
We don't mean a single cell, no.
Or a single like organism.
Well, I mean, everything back then was just prokaryotes, right?
Yeah.
It was these early prokaryotes.
What I mean is that it's not just a single cell. You're saying that it's multiple.
Yeah, probably a population. And like I said, there was probably one in this hot pool and one in that hot pool and one in the vents maybe down in the ocean, and there were probably all over these chemical evolutionary prebiotic life soups that were all interacting and trying to figure out, through this natural selection like process until you were getting these early cell like bacterial cells that were then able to have a membrane around them, able to have inside a DNA machinery of information content, expressing a phenotype to the environment, having reproduction with mutations, right? And that kind of an early cell then became better at competing. And then all of a sudden, as soon as you get a start down that pathway, that kind of early prokaryotic cell is going to outcompete anything else that's trying to also become an early cell.
So that cell that you're talking about would not be Luca?
Yeah, that population of cells would be the Luca, yeah. Yeah.
Does Luca just mean like converging point genetically?
Yes, last universal common ancestor, that's what it stands for.
I thought it was a singular thing.
No, I don't think so. We don't know, right? We don't know, but what I've read up on is it was probably a population of these early prokaryote cellular things that were all competing, right? And they were all reproducing, because they're all reproducing every, half an hour. They're probably doing stuff, so yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And again, like I said, there could have been multiple starting points all over Earth, but one of them was better than the rest, and then it occupied all the rest of the niches. And we have no evidence of those other things that might have existed because prokaryotes don't fossilize well. So we really don't have that evidence.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering.
Yeah.
So do you believe in human spirits, dog spirits, and insect spirits?
Yes. I'm just going to say, yeah, that's the short answer.
Even bacteria?
But if they don't, then whatever. Yeah, because this is the problem. As soon as you go, well, where do you draw the line? Okay, fine. Everything has some kind of intelligence, spiritual force behind it, fine. But then you even would go, well, even the non-alive things then do. Sure, okay, rocks do, whatever, I don't know. But again, I don't know. I don't know.
Same taking the step back thing.
Yeah. I don't know.
But wouldn't that be more of like a religious type of conversation versus a scientific?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a religion. There's no evidence of spirits.
Yeah, like a soul.
Yeah, there's no evidence for that. Other than maybe your soul has felt that it's been touched before. Then you have your own personal anecdotal experience and evidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it just seems to me that like a lot of this is just, you can separate science and you can separate faith, but then they interconvene. A lot of it.
Yeah, they
It's
do.
like debating with people on how they.
Yeah, that's what this whole talk is about, is in those moments when they intersect and then it seems like there's conflict, how do you deal with that? Yeah. What I will say is for LDS people, I actually like, because we kind of have that doctrine. Joe Smith said this, right? Said as much that other organisms have spirits. I like using that doctrine with LDS people because it sometimes helps them to treat the rest of the organisms, the rest of the diversity of life with more respect. Because I don't like the approach of we're the dominant species, we can do whatever we want to this planet, you know. I sometimes invoke the, well, wait a second, they also are creations of God who have spirits inside of them, and we should respect their place on this planet as well, right? So sometimes I do that selfishly to try to push LDS believers that they should be better environmentalists and better, you know, keepers, better stewards of this planet. You two didn't ask questions. Well, Marissa, you didn't either. But you're not a student anymore, so yeah, I guess that's why. No? Anything from you? Anything from you? Okay. Well, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Well, you don't need to talk. I didn't even have to go through all my slides. That was great.
Holy Noah.
I think I'm probably like 30 minutes in.
Amazing.